The storm had turned the Kansas prairie into a sea of mud, and Sarah Mitchell's boots were caked with it as she stumbled into the trading post at Redemption Creek. Her nurse's bag, the only possession she'd managed to grab before fleeing, hung heavy on her shoulder, but her stomach was hollow with 3 days of hunger. The gold wedding band on her finger caught the lamplight, the last remnant of a marriage that had died along with her husband 6 months ago, leaving her at the mercy of his brother, who decided a widow was property to be claimed. She'd run when Marcus had announced their wedding date, run through the night until her horse went lame, run until her feet bled and her throat burned with thirst. Now, in this rough settlement on the edge of nowhere, she stood before the counter with trembling hands, twisting the ring from her finger. "Please," she whispered to the trader, a grizzled man with calculating eyes. "I need food, anything. This ring is real gold." The door banged open, bringing with it a gust of rain-scented wind, and a man who seemed carved from the same unforgiving land outside. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered beneath a soaked duster coat, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and penetrating. A silver star gleamed on his vest. The sheriff of Redemption Creek surveyed the scene with those ice-chip eyes, taking in Sarah's mud-stained dress, her gaunt face, the desperate way she clutched that ring. "Gold isn't what's needed here," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. His gaze held hers, and she saw something unexpected there. Not pity, but recognition, as if he knew exactly what desperation tasted like. "What's needed is a nurse. My deputy took a bullet yesterday, and the doc's 3 days away in Abilene. You work, you eat. Fair trade." He turned to the trader. "Put whatever she needs on my account, Cal. She's with me now." Before we continue with Sarah and the sheriff's journey, I'd love to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take just a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. It really helps us grow and continue creating stories that transport you to another time and place. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to Redemption Creek. Sarah's pride warred with her hunger for exactly 3 seconds before practicality won. She nodded, her throat too tight for words, and watched as the sheriff, she heard Cal mutter, Sheriff Cole Branson under his breath, gathered supplies with economical movements, bread, cheese, dried beef, coffee. Not charity. Work. The distinction mattered more than he could know. The ride to his ranch passed in rain-soaked silence. Sarah clutched the food in her lap, afraid to eat too quickly and make herself sick, taking small bites of bread that tasted like salvation. Cole rode ahead on a massive bay stallion, his back straight despite the downpour, occasionally glancing back, as if to ensure she still followed on the gentle mare he'd provided. The horse knew its way home, which was fortunate, because Sarah's vision kept blurring with exhaustion. When they arrived, she expected a typical bachelor's dwelling, rough and neglected. Instead, the ranch house was solid timber with a covered porch, well-maintained fences extending into the darkness, and a barn that looked weatherproof and sturdy. Cole dismounted and was at her side before she could attempt it herself, his hands circling her waist to lift her down. The touch was brief, impersonal, yet she felt the strength in those hands, and something else, careful restraint, as if he were handling something fragile. "Deputies in the back room," he said, leading her inside. The house was clean, Spartan but functional, with a stone fireplace throwing shadows across pine walls. "Name's Tom Whitfield. took a bullet in the shoulder during a robbery attempt. I got it out, cleaned the wound best I could, but he's feverish." Sarah's nursing instincts kicked in, overriding her exhaustion. She followed Cole through the house, noting the neat kitchen, the absence of dust that spoke of a man who took care of his space. The back room held a narrow bed where a young man, barely 20, thrashed in fever dreams, his shoulder wrapped in surprisingly clean bandages that were nevertheless seeping. She set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and whiskey if you have it." For the next 3 hours, Sarah worked with the focused intensity that had made her one of the best nurses in Boston before her hasty marriage to Daniel Mitchell, before she'd followed him west only to watch him die of cholera, before his brother had decided she came with the property. She cleaned Tom's wound with practiced efficiency, applied a poultice of herbs from her bag, and sat monitoring his breathing while Cole brought fresh water and linens without being asked. Near midnight, the fever broke. Tom's breathing evened out, and the dangerous flush faded from his cheeks. Sarah sagged back in her chair, and the weight of the past 3 days crashed over her like a wave. Her hands began to shake. Delayed shock, she recognized clinically, even as her teeth started to chatter. "Come on." Cole's voice was gentle, his hand on her elbow, firm but not forceful. "You've done enough. He'll sleep now." He guided her to the main room where the fire had been built up to a roaring blaze. A blanket appeared around her shoulders, then a cup of coffee laced with something stronger. Whiskey, she realized, as the liquid burned down her throat and spread warmth through her chest. Cole settled into the opposite chair, his long legs stretched toward the fire, and for a while they sat in silence. "You don't have to tell me," he finally said, his eyes on the flames, "but I know the look of someone running, seen it in the mirror enough times." Sarah studied him over the rim of her cup. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, a scar that traced his jawline like a pale memory. He looked like a man who'd lived hard and survived harder. "My husband died," she heard herself say. "His brother decided I was part of the inheritance." Something flickered in those pale eyes, understanding and anger in equal measure. "Did he hurt you?" He tried. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I have good aim with a laudanum bottle. He'll have a headache for a week." The corner of Cole's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Nurse and fighter. That's a useful combination out here. He set down his cup and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I meant what I said. You work, you have a place here. Tom will need care for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. After that, if you want to move on, I'll give you supplies and a horse. If you want to stay," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "This is hard country, but it's honest. No one here will force you into anything. You have my word." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't know me. I could be—" "You're a person who needs help," he interrupted quietly. "That's all I need to know." Besides, a hint of wry humor entered his voice. "My cooking's terrible, and this place could use a woman's touch. Fair trade, remember?" Something unknotted in Sarah's chest, something that had been pulled tight since the moment she'd realized Marcus saw her as property rather than a human being. "Fair trade," she echoed, and for the first time in months, she felt the faintest stirring of hope. Over the following days, a routine emerged. Sarah tended to Tom, whose shoulder was healing cleanly thanks to her skilled care. Between nursing duties, She found herself naturally taking on other tasks, cooking meals that were actually edible, organizing the chaotic kitchen, mending the clothes she found in a basket that had clearly been ignored for months. Cole protested at first, but she silenced him with a look. "You're paying me in room and board," she said firmly. "I earn my keep." He'd studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Just don't overdo it. You looked half dead when you walked into that trading post." But she felt alive now, more alive than she had in years. There was something healing about the routine, the purposeful work, the vast prairie stretching endlessly outside the windows. And there was Cole, taciturn and often gone on sheriff's business, but present in unexpected ways. Fresh wildflowers appearing by the water basin, her torn dress mended with surprisingly neat stitches, a rocking chair carried from the barn and placed on the porch where she liked to sit in the evenings. "You didn't have to do that," she said one evening, running her hand over the smooth wood of the chair. Ranch came with it. He leaned against the porch post, his hat tilted back, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and gold. Previous owner's wife, she passed some years back, seemed ashamed for it to gather dust. There was something in his voice, old pain, carefully controlled. Sarah understood about old pain. "How long have you had the ranch?" 3 years. Bought it after. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "After I had reasons to leave my old life behind." She didn't push, though she was curious. Cole Branson was a man of layers. The stern sheriff, the skilled rancher, the surprisingly gentle caretaker who checked on Tom every morning and evening, asking intelligent questions about his recovery. There was a loneliness in him that echoed her own, a sense of someone who'd built walls to keep the world at a safe distance. A week into her stay, Sarah asked if she could learn to ride properly. She'd managed the journey to the ranch, but barely, clinging to the saddle horn like a child. Cole looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Can't live out here without good riding skills," he agreed. "Dawn tomorrow. Wear pants if you have them. Skirts are dangerous on horseback." She didn't have pants, but she found a pair of Toms in the laundry basket, rolled the legs up, and cinched them with a belt. When she emerged the next morning, Cole's eyebrows rose slightly, but all he said was, "Practical. Good." He started her on the gentle mare, Luna, teaching her the basics with patience she hadn't expected from a man so taciturn. How to distribute her weight, how to guide with legs and reins, how to read the horse's body language. When Luna spooked at a rabbit and Sarah nearly tumbled off, Cole was there instantly, one hand steadying her while the other gentled the mare. "Easy," he murmured, though Sarah wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. His hand was warm through the thin fabric of her borrowed shirt, and she became acutely aware of how close he stood, the scent of leather and sage that clung to him, the way his pale eyes had darkened with concern. "You're doing fine. Just breathe." She was breathing, but suddenly it felt difficult, as if all the air had grown thin. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, attraction, and beneath it, wariness. Two wounded people circling each other carefully, afraid to touch the raw places. Cole stepped back deliberately, his hand falling away. "That's enough for today. Tomorrow, we'll work on confidence." The riding lessons became a daily ritual, and Sarah found herself looking forward to them with an anticipation that had little to do with horsemanship and everything to do with the man teaching her. She learned to read him through these quiet mornings, the slight relaxation of his shoulders when she mastered a new skill, the almost smile when she made a dry observation, the way he unconsciously moved to position himself between her and any potential threat, even a prairie dog. By the second week, Tom was well enough to sit up and complain about being bedridden, which Sarah took as an excellent sign. Cole began taking her further from the ranch during their morning rides, showing her the boundaries of his property, teaching her to read the land, how to find water by following the flight of birds, which plants were edible and which poisonous, how to spot signs of riders from a distance. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked one morning as they paused on a ridge overlooking the prairie, a vast carpet of grass rippling like a green-gold ocean beneath the wind. Cole sat easy in his saddle, one hand resting on his thigh, his gaze scanning the horizon in a habit she recognized as constant vigilance. "Because knowledge is freedom," he said simply. "You said you were running from someone who thought you were property. Best way to stay free is to be able to take care of yourself." Her throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she managed, "for seeing me as a person." He turned to look at her then, those winter sky eyes intense and serious. "You're not property, Sarah. You're a person worth—" He stopped, as if the words had escaped without permission, then continued more carefully. "Worth saving, worth fighting for." The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and coming rain. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, and she had the wild urge to lean across the space between their horses and kiss him, to taste that stern mouth and see if it would soften under hers. Instead, she smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one in so long she'd almost forgotten how it felt. "So are you, Cole Branson." Something flickered across his face. That evening, after Tom had been settled for the night and Sarah had cleaned the kitchen, she found Cole on the porch, staring out at the star-scattered sky. She brought 2 cups of coffee and settled into her rocking chair without asking permission. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the prairie a familiar symphony now. Crickets singing, distant coyote calls, the soft rustle of wind through grass. "I was married once," Cole said abruptly, his voice low and rough. "Emily. She died in childbirth, along with our daughter. 5 years ago this September." Sarah's hand tightened on her cup, her heart aching for the pain in those few stark words. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but sensed he needed to speak without interruption. "I was sheriff in a town 2 days north of here. After I buried them, I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw her. The house we'd built together, the cradle I'd made." His jaw worked, muscle jumping beneath skin. "I sold everything, bought this place, and told myself I'd never care that much again. Because caring," he drew a shuddering breath, "caring hurts too much when you lose." "Yes," Sarah whispered, "it does." He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his face was stark with old grief. "Is that why you ran? Because you couldn't bear to lose anything else?" "I ran because I refused to lose myself," she corrected gently. "Daniel was kind, but he was weak. When the fever took him, his brother stepped in, and Marcus—" She shuddered at the memory. Marcus believed women existed to serve men, to be used. When he told me we'd marry, he actually said he was doing me a favor, giving me purpose and protection, as if I were a stray dog in need of a master. Cole's hands clenched on his cup, anger radiating from him in waves. "If he comes looking for you, he might," Sarah said honestly. "Marcus doesn't like losing his possessions. Then he'll learn you're not a possession." Cole's voice was flat, dangerous, the lawman and the protector combined, and that some lessons come hard. They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now, weighted with shared pain and mutual understanding. Two damaged souls, recognizing the wounds in each other. The careful way they both moved through the world, protecting the tender places. "I made a promise," Cole said quietly, almost to himself. "After Emily died, I promised I wouldn't let anyone get close again. Wouldn't risk that kind of pain." Sarah's heart sank, even though she understood. That's a lonely promise to keep. It is. He set down his cup and stood, moving to the porch rail, his back to her. Been keeping it for 5 years, until a stubborn nurse walked into a trading post looking half-starved and completely unbroken. And he stopped, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. "You make me want to break that promise, Sarah, and that terrifies me." She stood and moved to his side, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm terrified too," she admitted, "of trusting again, of letting someone close enough to hurt me. But Cole..." She gathered her courage and placed her hand over his where it gripped the rail. His hand was warm, calloused, strong. "I think sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be afraid and move forward anyway." He turned his hand over, his fingers intertwining with hers. And the simple gesture felt monumental, a bridge built between two islands of isolation. "I don't know if I can," he said hoarsely. "If I can be what you need, if I can love without drowning in fear of losing again." "Then we'll go slow," Sarah said softly, squeezing his hand. "We'll take it day by day. No promises beyond what we can keep. Just together, if that's what you want." "Together," he repeated, and the words seemed to resonate through him. He lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. Beneath her palm, she felt the steady, strong beat. "Together," he said again, and this time it sounded like hope. The kiss, when it finally came 3 days later, was as carefully restrained as everything else about Cole Branson. Sarah had been reaching for a high shelf in the kitchen, standing on her toes, when he'd appeared behind her, his hand steadying her waist while his other arm extended to retrieve the item she'd been straining for. She turned in the circle of his arms, meaning to thank him, and found herself inches from his face. The world seemed to still. His pale eyes were fixed on her mouth, his breath coming faster, and she saw the internal war playing across his features. Want versus fear, need versus control. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she lifted her hand to his face, her fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. "Sarah," he breathed, and it was both warning and plea. "I know," she whispered. "I'm scared too." He lowered his head with agonizing slowness, as if still fighting himself. But when their lips finally met, it was like prairie lightning. Electric, inevitable, perfect. His mouth was firm and warm, tasting of coffee and something uniquely him. And when his arms tightened around her, she felt simultaneously protected and powerful. The kiss deepened, and Sarah forgot to be afraid, forgot everything except the taste of him. The way his hand cradled the back of her head with such gentleness, the sound he made low in his throat when she pressed closer. This was nothing like Daniel's timid affection or Marcus's brutal claiming. This was two equals meeting, two people choosing each other despite their wounds, maybe because of them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. God help me, he murmured. I want you to stay, not as an employee, not as a responsibility, as, he struggled with the words, as mine, if you'll have me. Sarah's heart soared and trembled at once. I want that too. But Cole, I need you to understand. I won't be owned. Not ever again. I don't want to own you, he said fiercely, pulling back to look her in the eyes. I want to stand beside you, partners, equals. He cupped her face with both hands, his touch achingly tender. I want you to teach me how to love again without fear, and I want to show you that not all men think of women as property, that some of us know how to cherish. Tears pricked her eyes, and she kissed him again, pouring everything she couldn't yet say into the meeting of lips and breath and hearts. When they parted this time, they were both smiling, tentative and hopeful, like dawn breaking over the prairie. The fragile peace lasted exactly 2 more days. Sarah was in the barn, learning to saddle Luna herself, when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Multiple riders, moving fast. Cole appeared from the house, Tom hobbling behind him, despite his still healing shoulder. Both men wearing their guns with the ease of long practice. Get in the house, Cole ordered, his voice the flat cop tone she hadn't heard since that first night. Now, but Sarah had already seen the riders crest the ridge, and her blood turned to ice. 5 men, and at their head, on a showy palomino, rode Marcus Mitchell, her brother-in-law, her would-be husband, her nightmare given flesh. Too late, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. That's him, Marcus. Cole's jaw turned to granite. Tom, take Sarah inside. Bar the door. No. Sarah surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. I won't hide from him anymore. I won't give him that power. Cole turned to her, conflict raging in his eyes. Sarah, I'm not your property either, she said gently, touching his arm. I'm your partner, remember? Partners stand together. For a moment, she thought he'd argue, but then his expression shifted. Acceptance mixed with fierce pride. Together, he agreed, and positioned himself at her side as the riders approached, his hand hovering near his gun. He'd always been handsome in a polished way that hid the rot beneath. Slicked dark hair, expensive clothes, a smile that never reached his cold eyes. Behind him, his 4 ranch hands spread out in a loose semicircle. Intimidation tactics Sarah recognized all too well. Sarah, Marcus's voice dripped false concern. Thank God I found you. We've been so worried. You've been confused, grieving, not in your right mind. His gaze flicked to Cole dismissively. Thank you for looking after my fiancée, Sheriff. I'll take her home now. She's not your fiancée, Cole said, his voice deadly quiet. She's not your anything. Marcus's smile thinned. Perhaps you don't understand the situation. Sarah is family. She belongs with family. And family has certain obligations to each other. Her hands were shaking, but she clasped them together to hide it. I was your brother's wife. When he died, that obligation died with him. I owe you nothing. You owe me gratitude, Marcus snapped, his mask slipping. I offered you a home, protection, a position in society. Without me, you're nothing. A penniless widow with no prospects. I was willing to overlook your deficiencies and make you respectable again. And this is how you repay me? By running off and playing whore to some frontier lawman. Cole moved so fast, Sarah barely saw it. One moment, he was beside her. The next, he had Marcus by the collar, yanking him half out of the saddle, his gun pressed against Marcus's temple. Watch your mouth. The ranch hands went for their guns, but But Tom already had his rifle trained on them, and despite his injury, his aim was steady. "Don't," Tom said pleasantly. "Sheriff's been teaching me to shoot. I'm almost as good as he is now." "You have 3 seconds to apologize to the lady," Cole said, his voice arctic. "Then I'm arresting you for trespassing, harassment, and attempted kidnapping. We have cells in town that are real uncomfortable this time of year. Hot. Lots of rats." Marcus's face purpled with rage and fear. "You can't! I'm a respected businessman!" 2 seconds. Cole cocked the hammer. "I apologize." Marcus spat the words like poison. Cole released him with a contemptuous shove, sending Marcus sprawling back into his saddle. "Now here's how this is gonna work. Miss Mitchell is under my protection. She's free to leave anytime she chooses, go anywhere she chooses. But if she chooses to stay here," his voice hardened even further, "that's her right as a free citizen. If you or any of your men come onto my land again without invitation, I'll have you arrested. If you threaten her, harm her, or even look at her wrong, I will personally make sure you regret it. Do we understand each other?" "She's Marcus started. "She's not yours." Cole's hand was back on his gun. "Get off my land." For a moment, Sarah thought Marcus would push it, would call Cole's bluff, or order his men to fight. But something in Cole's eyes, that absolutely cold willingness to follow through, made even Marcus's arrogance falter. He gathered his reins with shaking hands, his gaze sliding to Sarah with such malevolence she felt it like a physical blow. "This isn't over," he said softly. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. A big one." "The only mistake I made," Sarah said, finding her voice stronger now, "was not hitting you harder with that laudanum bottle." Marcus's eyes widened. Apparently he hadn't realized she drugged him deliberately. And then he jerked his horse around and spurred it viciously. His men followed, casting nervous glances back at the 2 armed men watching them go. No one moved until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then Tom let out a long breath. "Well, that was exciting. I'll just go inside now and possibly pass out from standing too long." He hobbled toward the house, leaving Sarah and Cole alone in the yard. Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak, the adrenaline draining out of her in a rush. She swayed, and Cole caught her, his arms strong and steady around her. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe. I won't let him take you." "I know." And she did know, bone deep. But Cole, he meant that. He'll come back. Marcus doesn't give up when he wants something. "Let him come." Cole's voice was grim. "Next time, it won't be a warning." She pulled back to look at him, seeing the warrior beneath the sheriff, the man who'd killed before and would again to protect what was his. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in years, because this wasn't a man who would use his strength to control. It was a man who would use it to defend. "You called me your partner," she said softly. "But you still tried to send me inside." He had the grace to look chagrined. "Old habits, the instinct to protect." "I understand the instinct," Sarah interrupted gently. "I appreciate it, even. But if we're going to make this work," she gestured between them, "you have to trust that I can stand beside you, not behind you." Cole studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. You handled that better than I did, staying calm while I was ready to shoot him." A wry smile touched his lips. "Laudanum bottle, huh?" He had it coming. "I don't doubt it." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. "Sarah, I meant what I said out there. You're under my protection. But more than that, he paused, searching for words. I want you to stay, not because you need protection, but because the words seemed to catch in his throat, because I'm falling in love with you. Her heart stuttered, then soared. Cole, I know it's too fast, he continued roughly. I know we've barely known each other 2 weeks. I know I said I couldn't do this, that I was too afraid. But then I saw that bastard looking at you like you were a piece of property, and I realized I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of loving you. Sarah reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the emotions swelling in her chest. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered against his lips. And you're right, it's terrifying, but it's also the most real thing I've felt in years. They stood there in the dusty ranch yard, holding each other as the prairie wind whispered around them. Two people learning to be brave enough to love again. But the respite was brief. 3 days later, Tom, now recovered enough to resume light duties, rode into the yard at sunset, his face grim. Trouble, he called as he dismounted. Just heard in town. There's a gang of claim jumpers working the area, burning out small ranchers and taking their land. 6 homesteads hit so far. Cole's expression darkened. How many in the gang? Reports vary. 10, maybe 12, well-armed. Led by a man named Cutler, real bad character out of Missouri. Sheriff in the next county asked if you'd help coordinate a response. Multiple jurisdictions involved. Sarah's stomach clenched with dread, but she kept her voice even. How long will you be gone? However long it takes to run them down, Cole said, already moving toward the house to pack supplies. Could be 3 days, could be a week. He stopped and turned to her. You could stay in town, the hotel. I'll stay here, Sarah said firmly. This is my home now. I'm not running again. Sarah. Besides, she continued practically, Tom needs to go with you. He's your deputy, and he's healed enough for riding. I'll be fine. I can shoot. You taught me, remember? And I can handle the ranch work for a few days. Cole looked torn, the protector warring with the man who'd promised to treat her as an equal. Finally, he nodded. The Hendersons, neighboring ranch 5 miles east. Good people. If anything seems wrong, any sign of trouble, you ride there immediately. Promise me. I promise. He pulled her close, kissing her with desperate intensity, as if he could imprint himself on her soul. I'll come back, he said fiercely. Nothing will keep me from coming back to you. I know. She smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, memorizing the strong lines of his face, the exact shade of his winter sky eyes. Together, remember? Together, he echoed, and kissed her once more before forcing himself to pull away. She watched from the porch as he and Tom rode out in the gathering dusk. 2 silhouettes against the orange-streaked sky. The prairie felt suddenly vast and empty, and Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the cold knot of dread in her stomach. The first 2 days passed peacefully. Sarah threw herself into work, tending the animals, mending fences, cooking meals for one that tasted like dust in her mouth. She practiced her shooting each morning, the way Cole had taught her, until her aim was true and steady. At night, she locked all the doors, placed Cole's extra rifle by the bed, and tried not to jump at every sound. On the 3rd evening, as she was closing up the barn, she heard horses approaching. Relief flooded through her. Cole was back early. But as the riders came into view in the fading light, her relief turned to ice. Not Cole. Marcus, with 8 men this time instead of 4, and all of them armed to the teeth. Sarah didn't waste time on questions or fear. She ran for the house, her heart hammering, but they were faster, spreading out to surround the building before she could reach the door. Marcus dismounted leisurely, his smile sharp and cruel in the twilight. "Sheriff's away," he called out. "I made sure of that. Cutler's gang? That's my partner." The whole thing was a setup to draw the law away from here. Very convenient. Sarah's hand closed on the rifle she'd left propped by the barn door. She brought it up smoothly, the way Cole had taught her, and aimed it at Marcus's chest. "Get off this land." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Marcus laughed. "You're a nurse, Sarah. You save lives. You don't take them. You don't have it in you. Try me." Her voice was steady, even as her hands wanted to shake. "I will not go with you. I will not be your wife. And if you force me, I swear I'll find a way to kill you. Maybe not today, but eventually. You'll never be able to trust anything I cook, any drink I prepare, any moment you sleep. Is that really what you want?" Uncertainty flickered across his face, but his arrogance won. "You're hysterical. You need a firm hand, and I'm going to provide it. Boys?" The shot rang out like thunder, kicking up dust 2 inches from Marcus's boot. He yelped and jumped back, and Sarah jacked another round into the chamber. "Next one hits flesh. Your choice where." "You crazy bitch!" Marcus snarled, all pretense of civility dropping away. "Take her." The men started forward, and Sarah knew she was done. She could shoot 1, maybe 2, but 8 were too many. Still, she'd go down fighting. She squeezed the trigger, aiming for the nearest man's leg. Another shot cracked through the air, then another, coming from the ridge beyond the ranch. The man Sarah had targeted went down with a scream, clutching his thigh. Another of Marcus's men spun and fell. Chaos erupted, men diving for cover, horses rearing in panic. And then Cole appeared, riding down from the ridge like vengeance incarnate, Tom on his right, and 3 other men Sarah didn't recognize, flanking him. They were still firing, pinning Marcus's men behind whatever cover they could find, and Cole rode straight through the middle of it all, without slowing. His pale eyes locked on Sarah. He reached her in seconds, swinging down from his horse without breaking stride, positioning himself between her and Marcus. "You made a mistake," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "A very big mistake." "You're outnumbered," Marcus tried, but his voice shook. "No," Cole said coldly. "You are." "That's Sheriff Dawes from the next county, Sheriff Wilson from town north, and Deputy Marshal Crenshaw. We tracked your partner Cutler. He talked real cooperative once we explained things. Told us all about your arrangement, how you hired him to create a diversion, how you planned to grab Sarah while I was away. Problem is, we caught Cutler yesterday. His gang scattered, so I came home early." His hand dropped to his gun. "And I find you on my land, terrorizing my woman, with armed men. That's trespassing, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy. You're done, Marcus." Marcus's face went ashen, then red with impotent rage. "You can't prove." "We have Cutler's full confession." The man Cole had called Marshal Crenshaw said, riding forward. "Names, dates, the money you paid him. You're going to federal prison, Mitchell, for a long time." Sarah watched as they rounded up Marcus and his men, binding their hands, loading them onto horses. Marcus stared at her as they led him away, and she met his gaze squarely, letting him see her lack of fear, her absolute resolve. She wasn't his, had never been his, would never be his. When the other lawmen had departed with their prisoners, Cole finally turned to Sarah. She was still standing there with the rifle, and he gently took it from her shaking hands, setting it aside before pulling her into his arms. "You scared 10 years off my life," he said hoarsely. his face buried in her hair. When Tom and I were riding back and saw all those horses in the yard, I thought. He couldn't finish, just held her tighter. "I'm okay," Sarah whispered, even though she was shaking now, the aftermath of terror and adrenaline crashing through her. "I'm okay because you came back. You saved me." "No." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You saved yourself. You stood your ground. You fought back. I just helped finish what you started." His eyes were fierce with pride and love. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Sarah Mitchell, and I don't ever want to spend another day without you." "Is this?" She hardly dared breathe. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me," Cole said, dropping to one knee right there in the dusty yard. "Not because you need protection, not because you need a home, but because I need you. Because I love you with everything I am. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life and fall asleep thanking God you chose me." He took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Will you marry me, Sarah? Will you be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things?" Tears streamed down her face, but they were good tears, healing tears. "Yes," she said, pulling him up and kissing him. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married a week later in the small church in Redemption Creek, with Tom as best man and the preacher's wife standing up for Sarah. It was simple. Sarah wore a blue calico dress bought new from the mercantile. Cole wore his Sunday suit, and they said their vows with the prairie wind singing through the open windows. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Cole did so with thorough intensity, drawing hoots and hollers from the assembled townspeople. When they finally broke apart, both grinning, he whispered against her lips, "Together." "Together," Sarah agreed, and knew it was the truest promise she'd ever made. The years that followed weren't always easy. The frontier never was. There were droughts that tested their resilience, winters that bit with cruel teeth, moments when the old fears threatened to resurface. But they faced it all together. Two people who'd learned that love wasn't about possession or protection, but about standing side by side, equals in strength and courage. Sarah continued her nursing, becoming the unofficial doctor for the growing settlement. Cole remained sheriff for 5 more years before passing the badge to Tom and focusing on building the ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. They had children, 2 daughters and a son, all taught to ride and shoot and think for themselves. On their 10th anniversary, Sarah stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and remembering the desperate woman who'd walked into that trading post so long ago. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. "Any regrets?" he murmured into her hair. "Only that I didn't hit Marcus harder with that laudanum bottle," she said, and felt him laugh, the sound rumbling through his chest into hers. "That's my wife," he said with deep affection, "never one to back down from a fight. I learned from the best." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands resting on his chest, over his heart. "I love you, Cole Branson. Today, tomorrow, always." "Together," he said, and kissed her as the prairie stretched endlessly around them, wild and beautiful and free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Sarah and Cole's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.